So my guest today is Sam Jacobs, who is a serial entrepreneur. He's an author of the book Kind Folks Finish First. But it was a really wide-ranging conversation about changes to the VC industry, why kindness and profitability are not false polarities, why you can be both kind and profitable. And it was a really great conversation about personal and self-empowerment. So I hope you find it helpful. And if you're ready, let's get started. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you're listening to this, I'm so glad you tuned in today to Mission Driven You, which is a podcast focused on people who want to do good and do well in the world. And in that vein, I've got a really exciting guest today. His name is Sam Jacobs, and he's the CEO of a company called Pavilion, which is the premier community and career development platform for high growth leaders and also for their teams. He's also the author of a really interesting book called Kind Folks Finish First, and we're going to dig into that. But first of all, Sam, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So glad you're here. And I mentioned before we started, there's always one question we kick off every episode with, which is, tell us the story of somebody that made a difference for you. It could be a teacher, mentor, parent, just somebody that when you look back, you're like, wow, I wouldn't be where I am today without them.
I think one of the people that's had a really big impact on me is actually a former boss. It was a boss of mine when I joined a company called Gerson Lerman Group in 2003, and he actually had started the same week that I started. His name's Jonathan Glick, and he's a genius. He's also somebody that is involved in all kinds of cutting edge technologies and innovations. And he was just somebody. I was about 25 years old when I started at this company, and he really shepherded me into senior management under his tutelage over the 7.5 years that I was there. And when I joined, the company was doing about 25 million in revenue. And when I left, they were doing about 300 million. And so we saw an incredible growth journey. And he was one of the first people that, and he did it a lot of different ways, but really what he did was just give me, as much room to run as I could handle and give me massive opportunity and responsibility. He didn't always provide direct step-by-step instructions, right, but he believed in me enough that it helped me gain the confidence to become more of a leader in that organization. So that's one person that comes to mind. We've been friends now for 20 years. He's an investor in Pavilion. He's been a mentor the entire time. And even when I've gone through, a lot of downs and some ups in my career, he's always been there to lend a helping hand. He's one of those people where if you need, you might not hear from him all the time, but if you text him right at this moment and say, hey, I need to meet for a coffee or a drink tonight to talk about something that's important in my life, he will be there in an instant. And so that's somebody that comes to mind.
I love that story. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's always interesting because in the world of entrepreneurship, but in the world of anything, we just simply don't succeed alone. There's other people that helped get us here. So thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to your point, Will, that's the bigger answer is that there's been dozens and dozens and dozens of people that have helped me get where I am today. And that's the beauty of, that's the world I live in, which is community. And the whole purpose of it is that old phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And, if you want to go far, you need a group of people that support you, that you're connected to, that you help and that help you in return.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. It does seem counterintuitive. It shouldn't be, but it seems counterintuitive to kind of the story we're told in the culture, which is the ruthless win, the tough guy, the tough negotiator, the one looking out for themselves. They're the ones that are always going to come out on top. And yet you wrote this book called Kind Folks Finish First. So help us understand the story there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing about our society, about our culture, really about, and I don't mean to make it political or economic, but Western democracies and Western capitalism is that there's a lot of paths to success. There's not just one. So it's true that one of the stories we hear is that the cold-hearted, ruthless bastard is the person that makes it to the top of the pyramid. But the point of the book is that when I followed those precepts And when I was solving only backwards for myself and for kind of the next transactional moment where I could make the next 5 cents or 10 cents or $2 or whatever it may be, when I focused exclusively on making money to the exclusion of doing good or helping other people, I didn't make that much money. That was sort of the point. And every time I said, I'm going to sweep away all of the big ideas and I just want to make money, it didn't work. Right. And when I finally gave up, and, it's this moment of surrender. So there's like a serenity prayer reference. There's probably some kind of reference to the 12 steps in some way. And, acknowledging that you're powerless in some way over in the face of powers greater than yourself, that there's a higher power potentially. But the point is that once I stopped struggling so much to be something that I thought I was supposed to be, and once I just accepted the rules that I wanted to play by, that was when everything in my life changed. And so that's what the book is about. The book is the idea of my company. The company is called Pavilion. It is, we're over 10,000 members today all over the world. We have communities and representatives and members in Copenhagen and Singapore and Sydney and Boston and Sao Paulo. And so that reality that this thing is bigger than I ever thought it would be. And it never started, and it never was because I wanted it to be a big thing. I never set off with that ambition. The ambition I set off with was I wanted to build something that I believed in, that had job security for me, because it was clear to me I was a little unemployable as it related to working for other people. Right. And it was a business whose sole purpose was helping other people. And there's a lot of communities out there, and there's a lot of clubs, and sometimes the clubs are sort of organized really around the idea of they are cool and popular, even in the absence of any other more broadly defining mission. But this particular club is organized around a very specific purpose, which is to help people get where they want to go in their careers. And so I wrote the book because when I finally kind of got off the merry-go-round and set off on my own journey, and my own journey was not defined by becoming a billionaire or becoming on the cover of Fortune magazine or speaking at a TED conference. None of those things I've done, by the way. But my journey was, I'm going to build a business focused on helping people that I hope can support me. And if I can get to a certain level, then I can support myself. I can do it for as long as I want to do it. And that's all I need. And when I let go of all of the other preconditions, that ironically, and perhaps coincidentally or serendipitously, that's when all the stuff that I'd always wanted arrived anyway, when it comes to wealth and impact and size and scope. So that's what the book's about. It starts on Friday the 13th. It starts on Friday the 13th, October 2017. And I'm driving down the New Jersey Turnpike. And I've been fired 4 of my last 5 jobs. And my wife and I were going to a wedding. And I got a message from my then CEO. And it became clear it was one of those very terse messages that said, I didn't realize you'd be out today. Please see me first thing Monday morning. And this is a person, as I always joke, that liked to sleep in. So when she wanted to meet first thing Monday morning, it was an ominous.
It was not good.
It was not good. And that was the inflection point. And I guess I call it an inflection point because that was the moment I realized I was being fired. And I just decided to not nurse my wounds, not feel sorry for myself. I didn't need to go anywhere to clear my head. I just resolved in that moment that I was going to use that opportunity, being fired, as a springboard to change the trajectory of my life. And that's what, so the book is a memoir. The book is about this journey of building this company. And this book is about the principles that underscore the company itself. And that's what it's about.
I love that. And there's the idea of recovery and 12-step principles certainly resonates with my journey as well. So I totally get that. Is there a sense in which, I'm not even sure how to ask this, but is there a sense in which the kind of addiction to the cultural narrative or the sort of being beholden to the cultural narrative is its own kind of addiction? Like we feel stuck in this story of get ahead of the next guy, push yourself harder and all that. It's there in many ways, it shares some characteristics with certain of us who have dealt with addiction issues in the past. This idea that, well, of course, this is how you do it. This is how everybody does it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got friends and all of us. I mean, it's hard to be an adult in your 40s or 50s and not have some exposure to the world of compulsion and
Right.
obsession in whatever form
Right.
it takes.
Right.
And my experience is that more than drugs or alcohol, money is the central compulsion of our society. And even related and deeper than that is the comparison of yourself to other people. And it's of course easy. I'm not immune from it. This is not a thing I have. This is why it's like in recovery, as opposed, you're never cured, right? Like I'm cured of my instinct to compare myself to others, to seek and to strive to change my position in life, perhaps out of what the Buddha would consider to be like weakness or pain or suffering. So it's a complicated issue, but yeah, I think, and again, remember, I live in New York City.
Right.
So
you're in the village, right?
Yeah, I'm in the village, and this is a place, money rules this place.
Right.
Like this, if you ever think you've made it, come to New York, because there's always 10 people that, slightly bigger house, slightly nicer apartment. They went to the Amalfi Coast and they went somewhere even nicer than they went to the Seychelles, or something.
Right.
It's anyway, to your point, I think that part of our culture, and that's part of the balance, right? Part of the culture is about comparing yourself to others and competition and ambition. And my book, by the way, is not about that ambition is a bad thing, because I don't actually think it is. I actually get a lot of meaning and fulfillment from my ambition, from my interest in building things and taking the status quo and changing it in some way and leaving something behind. And I've done that with companies, and I've done that with music, and I've recorded albums and things like that. And it's all the central, this central burning desire that's in a lot of us to create something, to bring something out from inside and leave it with the rest of the world. So the answer to your question is yes. I think that there's a lot of the tension is between how do you live a healthy, centered, calm existence that still that doesn't mean you're complacent.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to drill down on that though, Sam, because this is a really big idea that comes up a lot for me. Is this, like, can I start a company with integrity, or can I make money? Can I be an artist? I have friends similar, like, can I be a writer and have integrity? Can I be this and have integrity? Can I be this and be successful? Talk more about how you came to that realization. I want to hear more about your journey. Like, what was it that you finally said, okay, I think I'm creating false polarities. I can be both successful financially and have a high degree of integrity. What was that journey like for you?
Well, it was very painful. I mean, again, the hardest part of all of this is you want it now. It's like the experiment, that social experiment with the kids, and they leave like the cupcake or the cookies. The ones that grab the cookies don't do well in life, and the ones that somehow find a way to distract themselves, gratification. And so it's not, for me, it's just been always, it's about, again, in this world where I feel competitive. Yeah. My peers and with my friends and with other people that are on different trajectories, it was a process of surrendering, I think, because again, there's a story in the book. I was coming out of GLG, this place where my mentor that I mentioned at the beginning, they paid us a lot of money, and I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And there was one year I made like $800,000 in that one year. And it felt thrilling, but also sort of dizzying and fear-inducing, because I didn't really feel like I contribute. If I make a certain amount of money these days, I can connect it to the work that I did and the value I created in the world. But this just felt like a little bit of like luck and accident. Yeah. And so I came out of that company thinking like, all I want to do is make money. That's the only thing that's important. And it was a period of really 8 years, from 2010 to 2018. And again, to the point of the book, really about 2017, when I just realized that it wasn't working. It just wasn't working. Some part of it is just a pragmatism of, I got to look at what's delivering results. And for me, there's a whole series of behaviors and activities and beliefs that were not delivering results. I have this scene in the book where I hire a coach, this guy, Jim Rosen. And one of the first things he says, what do you stand for? And I thought, well, that's a silly, what a stupid question. I stand for making money. That's what I stand for.
Why would I be here? Yeah.
Exactly. Like, it's work.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you can't stand for making money. You stand for money comes after you do the things that you stand for. And that led me on this journey. And again, part of it is just this willingness to let go and say, you know what, maybe I'm not going to become the thing that maybe I'm not, that special. Maybe I'm not going to be the president of ExxonMobil. I don't even know. It's like a totally random example, but I'm just going to have to let go of that and pursue what I want to be, no matter what happens and no matter what it ends up leading to. And again, that journey, that was 10 years, that was 15 years of my life. Yeah. And really my whole life's work is finally getting to a place where I can identify what are the factors that drive happiness, and then how can I nurture them and develop them.
For you. And so you have a sense of what your ends goals are. In coaching, we sometimes talk about the difference between means goals and end goals. You know what your end goals are. Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the big revelations, which I talk about in the book and which I still, try to share with other people, the title is Kind Folks Finish First, but the idea of kindness in the book, first and foremost, applies to me personally. Because the inner narrative that I had was not particularly supportive. And I often say, and I think other people, I'm not the only one that says this, but if the voice inside your head was another person, right, was an outside party, would you be friends with that person?
You would drop them in a hot minute. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that person is a jerk, that nothing is ever good. Right. They're never content. They never just say thank you. And so I was on a run with my friend, and this particular friend, I talk about him a lot, and he talks a lot, and has a lot of ideas. So sometimes it's a lot, and sometimes it's a little. But one of the things that he said was, "How's it going?" And instead of just saying great or saying I'm doing well, I give some half-hearted, dour, pessimistic answer, and he says, "Does that help?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Does it help? Do you find that by being negative and hard on yourself, does that draw people to you? Do you find that you get more opportunities? Do you get better results?" And I just find that to be a very useful framing, because sometimes, if you're too cerebral and you're too thoughtful and analytical, you want to question. For example, there's another question out there: do human beings have free will? Right. Or is everything determinism? Is everything already preordained and we're just following? And there's a lot of logical arguments why sometimes your body moves before you even have the ability to think about it. Therefore, how could you have thought to have moved it? But the whole point of it is that, what does it matter? What does it matter? What matters, I think, is that I enjoy my life more when I believe I have free will, even if I'm wrong. Right. I get better results when I think that I have free will. And if some philosopher wanted to dispassionately, definitively prove that I did not have free will, I wouldn't really care, because I'm not trying to solve, I'm not a physicist, I'm trying to deliver results in my life and deliver some kind of contentment. And so I get better results when I believe I have free will and when I take agency over my life and my outcomes. And I get better results when I'm nicer to myself. And when I give myself a break and say, you're doing, in many, many ways, you're doing great things. There's obviously room for improvement, but you're doing great things. You're a good person. You try hard.
Yeah, that's incredibly valuable. And I really appreciate that you named the book Kind, not nice, because it's sort of that's sort of the standard. Well, nice guys finish last, blah, blah, blah. But you wanted to focus on kindness. Talk about the difference between kindness and niceness.
Well, it's a funny story as well. It's the same guy, Scott, my friend. It was called Nice Folks Finish First, right? It was never going to be guys, because I think that term is, obviously gender exclusionary. But he said, Sam, that's interesting. He said, "What's the book called?" I said, "It's Nice Folks Finish First." And because we run together on Saturdays. And so, there's a pregnant pause as we're like jogging down the West Side Highway. And I'm like, what, Scott?
Yeah. Tell me.
Yeah, exactly. He said, "Well, I think a lot of things about you, my friend. You're interesting, you're smart, you're creative, but nice is not the first word that comes to mind." And
From the mouth of friends.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes they enjoy that sticking that little needle in, but it led to a useful reflection. And he's right. I'm not always the nicest person. And by nice,
Right.
I mean superficially pleasant, amiable.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, I'm trying to do the right thing. That doesn't mean I can control my mood in every instance. That doesn't mean that I can be, I can every single time that, sometimes I'm in a dark mood in an Uber, and the Uber driver, I've had people say, I don't know what your problem is today, buddy. So it's about a deeper motivation to try
Yeah.
and treat people with humanity and treat other living beings with humanity and with compassion, regardless of whether you do it in a gruff way, in a pleasant way. But it's about, actions speak louder than words. It's about how you actually behave in the world, not necessarily the veneer on top of your behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can personally attest to that. Growing up outside of New York, but then spending my adult life in the South, I've seen all manner of nice and kind. And I do appreciate that difference. It's a really important distinction. And it's always amazing how the universe brings these things into our story, because I was literally coaching a client just this morning on the difference between niceness and kindness. Of course, I knew our interview was coming up.
Amazing.
Yeah. So you have now started. So now you're choosing kindness as your operating system. Now I want to talk about Pavilion and what the impulse was behind that, how it works, and how you've grown that business.
Sure. I mean, in the classic, the classic tale of I was the customer, right? So
Right.
the Pavilion is a community for, it says all functions in the bio, but I think we're refining that to really just be what we originally were. So we originally were a community for revenue leaders, because that's what I was. So from 2003 to 2018, I was leading sales teams and marketing teams at high growth companies in New York City. And the idea that I had heading into these roles was that, as you become more senior, you have this idea of golden parachutes and golden handcuffs, and you'll get more wealth and more job security. You'll be part of these journeys where you build these companies over many, many years. And I realized that was not true anymore. That is not true anymore.
Yeah.
But the average turnover for an executive at a high growth company is about 17 months. So on average, people are coming and going more frequently than they ever have before in startup.
Wow.
And I think that's a function of the world that we live in and the rate of and pace of technological change.
Yeah.
And, the instant gratification needs of investors and of the founders that run the companies. But whatever the reason, the reality is that people are moving in and out of jobs more often than ever before. And there needed to be, in my opinion, something that felt, union is not the right word, but guild is probably the closest word.
Yeah. Yep.
Where do you develop your craft? Where do you develop your trade? Where can you go to learn from people that have walked in your footsteps, walked in your shoes, so that you can be good at these things? Because companies themselves are not going to be equipped to train you on how to do the actual functional work, particularly, right, in a world where the functions themselves are changing by the day. How to be a good sales leader, how to be a good marketing leader. I mean, again, just think about the fact that as we're recording this in April of 2023, ChatGPT is about 5 months old.
Yeah.
Right. So being a marketer in 2022 is very, very different than what it's going to mean to be a marketer in 2024, because you're going to need to know how to use generative AI and how it fits into your work. Yeah. And that wouldn't even as a sentence make sense 2 years ago.
Right.
Right. So, and so where are you going to go? What kind of organization is going to exist that can provide that connective tissue to help develop you as an individual in your career? And that is what Pavilion is about. That is fundamentally what we're about. There's lots of communities out there, as I mentioned. There's lots of clubs. There's YPO and EO. But for me, I want Pavilion to be a place, first and foremost, to be honest, of sophisticated utility. And what I mean by that is I want it to be useful in the way that going to vocational school and learning how to become a welder is useful definitionally, because it gives you a practical skill that you can monetize so that you can put a roof over your head and provide for your family potentially. So the situation that I was in was I was one of the people on the merry-go-round. I was being fired and going into new companies and getting all excited about it and then being asked to leave. And I created this community as a mechanism to help support myself and my friends so that at least we could find new jobs when we needed to. We could learn how to negotiate more effectively and successfully. We could input best practices into the companies to give us a greater chance of success. And I thought, I didn't think it was a venture scale business. I didn't think it was some global idea. I just thought it's a sales executive club, and but with a point of view. And I don't know why there isn't one in New York, but there doesn't seem to be. So I'll do the one in New York. And then people started hearing about it from all over the world and started reaching out to me. And then we were off to the races. And then the big inflection point was really COVID, when everybody was alone and felt an acute need to find digital community more than ever. And that was when we grew, 4.5x over the course of 12 months. And that led to a funding round, which again, I never anticipated even being possible.
Yeah.
And then that led to its own series of challenges. And over the last year and a half, 2 years, when you have a little bit more capital and you have this aspiration of growth, and sometimes it pulls you a little bit away from your core vision, which is to the point of, the bio you read says for all functions. And we've realized that we're not going to be able to do that.
Right.
Really focused on what we can do. And so it's been this period of expansion and contraction and diffusion and focus. And now here we are. Yeah.
That's really helpful. And I want to talk in a minute about some of the changes that I think are happening in the venture capital world and in startups in general. But I want to pause because you just talked about going through significant changes. Tell us what it looks like for you to stay grounded and stay connected to your purpose during those times of conflict and change and turmoil.
Well, it's hard. I'm not going to say that it's easy. I mean, first of all, there's like a bunch of different lessons. One of them is that, you want to believe in the story of your own exceptionalism, but the reality is we are all connected. And I mean that metaphysically, and I mean that specifically as it relates to the economy, right? We're all part of the economy. When things are going really, really well, then you're going to tend to do a little bit better, and sometimes way better. And when things aren't going as well, you're going to tend to do as everybody else is going to tend to do. So that's one part of it, is like not attaching your identity to the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of the macroeconomic environment, right? When money is free and the Fed's pumping currency into the economy and you own an asset like a company, you're going to do better. The stock market's going to go up and you're going to feel like a genius. And when the Fed raises interest rates faster than at a time in the last 50 years, then you're going to feel like maybe you're not as smart. And neither of those things are true. You weren't a genius before and you're not an idiot now. So one part of it is just a little bit of perspective. And then what you've got to do is you've just got to, again, it's all about, for me, all of life, when I'm focused on the long term, when I don't need anything in the moment, or as there's another way of saying, when I'm happy in the moment, then you can make more grounded decisions. But when you're coming from a place of need or desperation or anxiety, that's when you make decisions that are not as grounded. And so that's, for me, the story of our company over the last, year and a half was we had this idea of like community and this professional development platform and being the modern version of a guild. But we said we can do this for all functions. And we can do this for all levels of seniority. We can do it for junior people and for senior people. And all of that is moving away from your core customer to different customers. Now, that might make sense. There's plenty of reasons why that might make sense. One of the biggest reasons why you might need to do that is if you've reached the end of your current group of existing customers. But I hadn't reached the end.
Right.
So I had a friend and she said, well, how big is your total addressable market? And I said, well, just salespeople, sales executives, sales and marketing executives in North America. We estimate there's about 60,000 VP of sales, VP of marketing, CEOs and founders at high growth companies from 0 to 50 million in revenue, which is not that much.
Right.
And she said, okay, so how many do you have? I said, we have 4,000. And we have 10,000 total, 4,000 executives, 6,000 non-executives. She said, then why did you ever do anything other than just go and try and find the next 54,000 executives? And I said, that's a great question. And I wish you'd asked me that question 2 years ago. So,
Yeah.
So, I think, again, but what it fundamentally comes down to is how do you construct your day-to-day in such a way that you're not operating from a place of desperation or anxiety. And sometimes what that means, specifically when it comes to high growth companies, is you either have enough money to live forever or you're profitable. And if you're unprofitable and capital constrained, that's a bad recipe. That is not a recipe for peace of mind.
Right.
So part of what we've had to do over the last, honestly, 4 weeks ago, we did a pretty big reorg and we parted ways with a number of exceptional people, but we did it because we needed to become profitable so that partially in answer to this question, so that we could operate from a place of bounty and a place of focusing on our customer and not a place of desperation or need.
Yeah. And there was actually probably a sense of kindness in that. Yeah.
Long-term kindness, you try to make, you try to treat people well and you give them severance and you try to acknowledge that you were the reason that, they joined in the first place and you were wrong and that you made some mistakes. But the thing that would be unkind in a way is knowing that you've made a mistake and not doing anything about it. We serve 10,000 people and there's a lot of people that we've helped in meaningful ways in their life. And I got to keep that going, I don't want to go out of this because I'm too scared to make a tough decision.
Now, tell us more about the idea of a guild and why you think that's important, because historically people came into the startup world. Typically they started at either one of the big consulting firms or they started at a big company and then they kind of proved their chops and then they came off and started working in the startup space. Why do you think it's important that we have a guild?
I think it's important because the big answer to the question is, that there is no security or stability in the modern world. Yeah, that would be the simplest answer to the question. And as I said, even again, I'm not trying to be too futuristic here, but there's a lot of very smart people talking about, well, why do you need companies in a world where you have AI? Like, why do you need 20? At a minimum, you're going to need 10 people when you used to need 30, right? Because ChatGPT and the future iterations, they will be your personal assistant. They can create copy. They can create join tasks. So what does all that mean? All of that to me just means volatility. That's what it means. It doesn't mean no opportunity. There's plenty of opportunity, but the idea of a company as a steady long-term repository of that is where their focus to spread their product to a large group of people is directly connected to your focus of building monetizable, transferable skills that you can use to support yourself. I think those things are diverging more quickly than they have in the past. And in the past, the world didn't change so quickly. I'm always struck by, this is sort of a random aside, but when you watch Mad Men, it doesn't, nothing happens on a day. He can take a 4-hour nap and that's okay. So in the modern world, I just think we're all going to be free agents of a kind, and we're going to have to take responsibility for the skills that we want to develop that will help us provide for ourselves, absent, universal basic income or something like that. So that means that, where are you going to learn those skills? Well, you've got to pick a path, and then there's going to be companies that train you and develop you. And those companies they're not going to work for your employer. They're going to work for you because it wouldn't make sense for them to work for your employer, because your employer is not dependable or reliable enough to support you over 15 years. Maybe they can support you over 2 years. Part of sometimes when people hear the average tenure is 18 months or 17 months for a high growth executive, some part of that's scary. There's people like me that say, you know what, maybe that's the right amount of time. I get bored after a year and a half. Maybe that's how long I should be at a company. Right. So at any rate, I think much more of the world over time is going to look like Hollywood, is going to look like groups of independent agents that coalesce into teams. And some of the teams are stable because those people like working together, and some of the teams are not. But fundamentally, your career is going to be your responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I want to come back to that. But one of the things that came up for me as you were talking was how important having a community as well, and not just the guild, but a community, something that you belong to that isn't tied to, a corporate structure and isn't necessarily tied, if you think about Bowling Alone and some of these other books that have talked about how a lot of our community institutions have gone away. What do you do or how do you guys help create a sense of community so that people always feel connected, a sense of belonging?
Well, I mean, that's our business. We're trying to do that every way that we can think to. So what does that mean in practice? That means that we use online interfaces where people can ask questions and get answers. It means we try to create status and recognition for our members based on those who are most helpful or those who are volunteering. So we have these concepts of what we call core groups, which are groups of about 100 to 150 people in the same region. And we want those people, and those people have a monthly call, and those people meet up in person and go to happy hours and go to dinners. We host, currently about 100 salon style dinners every year all over the world. We host major events and conferences. We're hosting all kinds of digital events. But it's really every way that we can think to create connections between people so that they form durable bonds that they can rely on to accelerate their own self-interest through reciprocity and kindness. I think that's what we're trying to do. And I wouldn't really call it like some kind of landmark innovation, but one of the things that we built over the last couple of years is this thing called Pavilion University, which is really just our online learning programs. And that is about community in the same way that regular college is about community. How so? Because we put people into cohorts, you take a class, but you talk about what you learned in the class with a study group in the same way you might do that in an MBA school. And the consequence is that you form relationships with people that as you go through this learning journey. And so, all of it, community is about common interest, is bringing people together on common interest, common goals, and then creating a context for those people to interact and support each other. And that's what we're trying to do. But again, there's no one perfect formula. It's every way that we can think to.
Yeah, I love that. And for you, isn't it about providing the opportunities? Because I want to get back to this notion of self-ownership, which seems so important in everything you've shared so far. But even the providing of a community, doesn't it still come down to what advantage you take of it as an individual?
Yeah, of course. And that's why, scaling community is very hard. And that's where we've made mistakes, right? We've made mistakes because, again, if the purpose of the community is it's the cool kids club, well, by definition, there's no way to grow the cool kids club without letting in people that the cool kids don't think are cool, right? I mean, maybe other people have figured it out, Davos or something like that. I haven't figured it out. That's not my instinct or inclination. My inclination is the way to scale is to make it useful. That is my North Star. My North Star is whether you're sitting in class with someone you like or don't like, you're going to get skills. I'm going to teach you stuff from this world that is going to be useful to help you make more money, get a better job, and live a more fulfilling life. And community will wrap around that, but it's not what I lead with. What I lead with is change your life. What I lead with is build new skills, make more money, learn how to negotiate, learn how to start your own consulting business, learn how to become a CEO when you were not a CEO, learn about the differences between private equity and venture capital, learn specific practical answers to questions that are hard to Google, and where real world experience and practitioners are going to lend a hand. That's my North Star. And then what I'm really trying to do is all of it as a Trojan horse, because the values of the community that are articulated in the book, those are underpinning everything. But it's hard for you to, it would be hard, Will, for me to ask you for $2,700 a year, which is the membership amount, to say, because you're going to get to help other people and be kind. And you're going to say, well, that's great, Sam. I woke up this morning looking for my next consulting gig or my next coaching gig, or struggling with the next chapter of the book that I'm writing. That's what I need help with. So I want to help other people, but that is not my primary, that is not the A to B shortest path between two points. So that's what we lead with.
And I appreciate that. And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier, that this notion of living out your purpose, living out your values, and being profitable they're not mutually exclusive at all. In fact, they're quite complementary.
Yeah, and there's a funny story there because the book, I came up with the title, and then the publisher said, Sam, are we sure we want to call it that? Because maybe it's called kindness principle. It's not really about kind folks finishing first, right? It's about, it's just about being kind as a nourishing sense of altruism.
Right.
And I said, no, that's incorrect. The point of the book is that this is a methodology to achieve success, however you define it. And if you want to define it as making money, then yes, it is a path to making money. It's just a different path to making money. It's a longer term path to making money. It's about making money over 20 years, not over 6 months.
Yeah.
So, so to your point, it is that the book is explicitly about, in some ways, it's almost, I don't know if it's tacky or gauche, but this is a recipe for professional success that is simply different than the recipe that we've been led to believe is the only path.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. So I want to take us out with one kind of final question. This is a question I've been playing around with lately. So oftentimes I have people on this podcast who are giving very practical advice, but then also usually the people that are attracted to this podcast are also offering a bigger frame for how to live in the world. So what I want you to do is imagine that Kind Folks Finish First ends up being required reading at Davos. It gets into the President's Economic Council. They're passing it around in the UN, and we're 20 years from now. So we're in 2043, and people have read Kind Folks Finish First. How do you imagine the world would be transformed by them reading this book?
I think it's a great question. And what I hope, I mean, here's what, of course, I would hope: more economic growth, right? GDP is up 4% instead of 3%. I think, however, what you would feel on a day-to-day basis is just a bit more softness in the world, a bit more softness, a bit more people. I come across so many people they don't understand. Honestly, I hate to say this, but many of them are European, but they don't understand that the results they're getting are a function of their worldview, are a function of their outlook, are a function that they are convinced that being kind of short-term focused is the only responsible path. And they don't, I don't mean to make it sort of weirdly, jingoistic or cultural, but it is a kind of American sense of what's possible without being forced to quantify it. It is a world of non-zero sum outcomes, right? It is a world of abundance. And so how would you experience that on a day-to-day basis? People would be on the margin more helpful. People on the margin you wouldn't get strange bills from everybody every time somebody made an introduction, right? That people would be willing to do 30 to 45 minute phone calls with you and not have this long soliloquy about how they're giving away their consulting advice. They would understand that karma is a real thing and it comes back to them. And so again, like the sense that you would get is just a bit more softness in the world, a bit more. And again, it's hard to, some of these are just like the ways that I look at the world, but a little bit less victimization, a little bit more agency, a little bit more acceptance that, the world turned out, putting aside tragedy, putting aside, horrible car accidents and volcanic eruptions and all of that stuff. But generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, the things that happen to you are a function of your behavior, which is a good thing because it means you can change your behavior to change the things that are happening to you. And so that's what I would hope. I would just, again, like people a little bit more open, a little bit more willing to lend a hand, a bit more willing to check themselves, a little bit less defensive, a little bit less polarizing, a little bit less, let me listen before I form a snap judgment and sort of cast you as the enemy. That's what I would hope for.
I love that vision. I love that vision. Thank you, Sam. So Sam Jacobs, you need to pick up his book, Kind Folks Finish First. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes. Tell us how else people can connect with you. How can they learn more about Pavilion? How can people find out, get into the Sam Jacobs world?
Well, they can, easy way to do it is to go to our website, joinpavilion.com, and fill out, or you can email me, sam@joinpavilion.com. You can text me. You can find me on LinkedIn. We're pretty easy to find. The people that should reach out to us, if you're a founder or you're a leader of a revenue function at a company that's looking to grow, and you want more skills and you want more support and you want to plug into a global community of people committed to helping you, that's when you should reach out.
I love it. Sam Jacobs, thank you. Thank you for the book. Thank you for your voice. And thank you for being here today.
All right. Thanks for having me.